Today we are going to talk about simultaneous translation and its challenges, difficulties, benefits, and how this process is performed, and what equipments should we use while translation process. Let's get started. Okay, simultaneous translation. It's a kind of interpretation, and it's a psychophysiological anomaly as a profession. Simultaneous interpretation is performed using special and expensive equipment, thanks to which the interpreter performs the translation almost simultaneously with the speaker's speech, and the speaker does not need to pause. The time lag between the simultaneous interpreter and the speaker is several words or even sentences, and depends on the pair of languages, the interpreter's experience, skill level, and individual characteristics. Nevertheless, it's important to remember that each individual's psychophysiological profile is unique. As we know that simultaneous translation is performed within some equipments. So in this slide you can see that it says that we need an expensive equipment which transfers the audio to the listeners. Simultaneous interpretation requires special equipment. Those are a stationary cabin, microphone and 2 pairs of headphones for interpreters, radio headphones according to the number of people in need of translation. So we don't know how many people will participate in the conference, so beforehand we should know the number of the people. Then we have to arrange the radio headphones according to the people's number. Simultaneous translation. In the process, with the use of simultaneous interpretation, events are organized, such as meetings or commissions, conferences, seminars, presentations, and etc., with the participation of a significant number of people in large auditoriums, such as conference halls. 2, sometimes 3 translators sit in the cabins, which replace each other every 20 and 30 minutes by agreement. Each translator is also paid for every hour in the cabin. Interpreting at conference and other similar events, simultaneous or subsequent, is also called conference interpretation. The terms conference interpreting and conference interpreter are used more often in English. Let's interpret what is said here. So why do we need 2 or 3 people in the cabin? First of all, simultaneous translation is not that easy process. So sometimes the translator may become easily tired, so he needs a help. That's why sometimes 2 or 3 people assist him during the translation process. Or sometimes the translator may not take notes quickly, so the translators beside him will help him in the process. If the texts of speeches or presentations, such as slideshows, are provided in advance, the translator can view or fully translate the original text of the speech in advance. So sometimes the people who are going to deliver a speech give texts beforehand to the translators. So it makes the process easier. And it becomes very easy for a translator to translate it because he or she has already translated or worked on it beforehand. During the translation, the translator makes the necessary adjustments if the speaker strays off the original text. For example, tells a story about what happened to him yesterday on the way to the conference. This type of simultaneous translation is called text-based simultaneous translation. So, what does it mean? It means that sometimes speakers may go off the topic and they begin to talk about something happened, for example, during the day. So this makes the process for the translator difficult because it doesn't belong to the topic. So that's why sometimes the translator send warnings to the speaker. And why it is called text-based? As I mentioned before, sometimes the texts are given to the translators beforehand, and that's why they work on the texts, then translate it directly. with the speaker's pace. During reports, lectures, and presentations, the speaker can read the information on the slide or refer to this information. For example, the speaker may begin. As you see on the slide, it is shown that in 2005 and etc. Interesting presentations can be found at www.ted.com. For example, we have given this website for you. If you want to look at some, or if you want to check out some interesting slides, you can go through this website. In this case, the simultaneous interpreter essentially makes simultaneous translation from the sheet. For example, sometimes the speaker will use PowerPoint presentation. So he or she gives the presentation to the translator so that the translator can make his or her notes beforehand. And when the conference begins, the speaker speaks from the slide and the translator begins to translate through the slide. With simultaneous text-based interpreting and simultaneous side translation, first the perception is made by ear and then the received information is compared with the perceived visually. If the information received by ear differs from the written text, then the translator translates, relying only on auditory perception. The same thing happens when the speaker speaks too quickly and the interpreter does not have time to comprehend the information. And now the first challenge begins. Why? You can ask why, because, for example, speakers, as I mentioned in the previous slide, the speakers may go off the topic very often. And this makes the process very difficult for the translator because he or she has worked on the speaker's speech, but sometimes the speaker do not follow his speeches. So this becomes more challenging and more difficult for the translator. But at this time, what translator does? he or she translates or transfers the information to the audience in general concept, and he or she has to know the audience beforehand. What does it mean? It means that he or she has to know whom she will give the translation. If the translator has translated the entire text in advance and the speaker does not make any changes, the translator reads the translation already made by him. In this case, his work essentially boils down to reading a previously translated text, and the stress during work is not so high. And that's the main point. As I mentioned before, so if the text is already in a translator's hand, it becomes very easy for him to convey the information to the audience, to transfer the information and to translate it easily. And the stress becomes low in this case. In the modern world, with large flows of information and the frequent conferences, simultaneous interpreters usually look through the texts of speeches or slides of the presentation, if they are provided in advance, make notes on terminology, but do not translate the entire text. Interpreters hope for speakers' good speech, reaction, skills, experience, and usually do not like to write very much, or they simply don't have the time or energy to make translations in advance. So what does it mean? It means that sometimes we need a speaker to be fluent in his speech, to have a good accent in his speech. So it makes the process easier for the translator to understand, then translate directly. And by the way, the translator does not have much time in the cabin to make translations in advance or beforehand. In contrast to consecutive interpretation, in simultaneous interpretation, the perception of speech and the generation of speech in the translation are almost not separated in time. The memory is less loaded and the interpreter does not enter interactive interpersonal relationships with the conference participants. Okay, before explaining this, let me speak about consecutive interpretation. Consecutive interpretation is a kind of interpretation in which the process is performed directly after the speaker speaks. For example, the speaker first delivers his sentences, 2 or 3 sentences, then the translators begins to translate it. That's called consecutive translation. So, what is the difference here? In simultaneous translation, our memory is not loaded very much. Why? Because we directly translate simultaneously. It means at the same time we make the translations with the speaker's speech. The speaker speaks and we do not wait. We just translate. We just translate directly. So our memory is not loaded. And by the way, the translator does not have to contact with some people in the conference or with the speaker, because his job is only to translate the text or a given speech. Usually records are not kept in simultaneous translations, but sometimes it can be done. Yes, so that means that in some conferences people prefer to record the recorded translation, but sometimes they do not need, or in official conferences, forums, and the translations are recorded. With simultaneous translation, even the most experienced translator will always lag behind the speaker. Yes, no matter how experienced you are, you will probably lag behind the speaker. Why? Because we cannot sometimes catch up with the pace of the speaker. They sometimes go very fast, they sometimes go very slowly. That's why it's very hard to follow their pace. Translating the end of the phrase just uttered, he already listens and remembers the beginning of the next one. If, at the same time, a long list of names, titles, numbers is given in the speech, additional difficulties arise. And it is here that colleagues always come to the rescue. In the previous slides, we talked about this, that sometimes in the cabin, 2 or 3 translators are needed. Because in the process like this, for example, a speaker speaks about statistics, numbers, figures, and etc. So it's very hard for a translator to take notes and at the same time to memorize the numbers. So at this time, his colleagues come to help and they note down the numbers or statistics on behalf of him. Then when he reaches that numbers, he reads them directly from the paper. And the translation is not only completely accurate, but it is also consistent. And with the help of the colleagues, the translation becomes more accurate. One of the difficulties in simultaneous translation can be the rate of the speech. The average speech rate in British and American English is 120 and 150 words per minute. Okay, this is very important because the speaker has no idea how long will the speech will be, or how many words the speaker is going to utter. So he's just ready in the cabin to translate what comes to his ear. Optimum for a simultaneous interpreter is considered to be a speech rate of 100 or 120 words per minute and a rate of 150 or 200 words per minute. It is as professional English-speaking speakers say, and it's considered fast, reduces the quality of the translation and leads to omissions and errors even with experienced work synchronized interpreters. So this is another challenge for a translator, because if a speaker exceeds the limit of the word rates, then it makes the translator's work more challenging and more difficult. So the translator in this process has to omit something which may lead to the inaccuracy of the speaker's speech or the inaccuracy of the information. And this will cause the problem. So the speaker has to pay attention to the word rate of his speech, because he has to keep in mind that a person in the cabin is ready to translate. And he or she mustn't make his or her work more difficult by speaking faster or by uttering much more words than intended. The tempo of prepared speech is faster, so it is easier to perceive and translate unprepared speech. So it says that it also becomes more difficult for an experienced interpreter. So the word rate here is very important. Interesting and, as it seems, promising is the transitional type of interpretation, which is known as simultaneous consecutive interpreting. In 1999, European Union translator Ferrari, during consecutive interpretation, while making translation notes, simultaneously recorded a segment of speech on a device. Then, in a pause, he quickly put on his earsets and translated, listening to a segment of speech for the second time and relying on his notes as well. Experiments with such simultaneous consecutive interpretation show that double listening increases the accuracy or adequacy of translation. Of course, it depends on a person that you can do two things at the same time, but it depends on your ability. For example, you can listen to the speaker and at the same time you can record his speech in order not to miss the whole information in the speech. And Mr. Farade did it very well, and we can see this from the slide that he recorded a segment. It means a little speech of the speaker to the device, on a device. Then while interpreting, he also used his recorded segment, and that's why his translation became more accurate and adequate. Advantages to simultaneous interpretation. Unlike consecutive interpretation, the speaker's speech sounds without pauses. Yes, of course, in simultaneous translation, sometimes we cannot stop, because if we stop, the gist of the given speech may be missed. This makes communication more dynamic. Today, knowledge of a foreign language is not uncommon, and many participants prefer to listen to a lecture in a foreign language in the original. Such people, as a rule, get annoyed when, during a consecutive translation, the speaker stops and everyone listens to the translation. Of course, English has become a global language, so people prefer to learn it first as first language. So, of course, we know that the language of the most conferences is English, of course. In the conference, there are lots of people who know English, so they prefer to listen to it in English, not to the original speaker. So that's why the speaker stops and people listen to the translator who speaks in English. In comparison with the use of subsequent translation, the time of the event is approximately halved. What does it mean? For example, in consecutive translation, first the speaker speaks, then you speak, the translator speaks. Then it takes too much time. But what happens in simultaneous translation? So a simultaneous translator does not wait. He directly translates with the speaker, and they perform the speech at the same time in both languages, the target language and the source language. That's why the time is halved. Translation can be carried out simultaneously into several languages. For example, in the organizations of European Union. What does it mean? It means that there are lots of people from different countries, and for example, they cannot know English, or not everyone knows English in the conference. So, in their own language, the translation is transferred to their ears. Disadvantages of simultaneous interpretation. It also has both advantages and disadvantages. Let's see what they are. For organizers, simultaneous interpretation is much more expensive than consecutive. The fees of simultaneous interpreters are high, plus the payment for the rental of special equipment. And you can think why the simultaneous interpreters are expensive. Because their job is very difficult. Why? Because they translate it, as it says in the word, simultaneously, means at the same time with the speaker. So it becomes harder and difficult. And second of all, they have to use special equipment, and which cost much more. The need to involve at least 2 interpreters who know the subject of the event. In the previous slide, we said that in the cabin 2 or 3 translators are sometimes needed. So it increases the price. Loss of information is greater than with consecutive translation, and the adequacy of the translation is lower. And this is of course inevitable because as I said, if the speaker's pace is too fast, then the translator cannot catch up with the speaker, so he will probably lose the gist of the information, and he may lose the important words or the important parts of the speech, and that's why the accuracy and the adequacy will be lost. Okay, what does it mean? It means that, of course, a simultaneous translator is much more stressed. Why? Because, first of all, the speaker may stray off the topic. And second of all, his pace cannot be the same as the translators. And third of all, he can extend the range of the words. That's why all these can create problem for the translator. And of course, if the speaker's accent is difficult to understand, and it also makes problem for the translator because he cannot understand the spoken or delivered speech. Requirements for a simultaneous interpreter. So, what a simultaneous interpreter requires during the process? Okay, so what should a simultaneous translator have? Rich vocabulary in both working languages. It means that in the source and target language, a simultaneous translator had better have information about them. If he has, the translation process will be much easier for him. Competent speech in both working languages, I said it. A solid stock of stable constructions, cliches, and phrases in both working languages. In this case, a simultaneous translator during his life has to work on some set expressions or constructions or grammar and some cliches and phrases which are commonly used in the target language. Automation of linguistic and speech means of expression. The ability to quickly find equivalence. And that's also inevitable. For example, if a translator during the process cannot translate the given word into the target language, so he has to find another equivalent, another word for that. Or thus, in a word, we can say he or she has to paraphrase it. Good listening skills, listening comprehension. Of course, it's one of the most important parts, or one of the most important abilities for a translator. If he doesn't have good ears, then he can miss lots of information. Breadth of outlook, encyclopedic knowledge. The more the translator has knowledge on the given topic, the better the translation will be. Phonetically well-articulated speech, correct intonation, phonogenicity. Of course, the translator must have good accent, good phonetics, and of course, correct intonation. Because if he doesn't possess any of these, and the audience will have difficulty in understanding him or her. Fast speech. And of course, he has to be fast and quick because the process happens at the same time with the speaker's speech and the translator's speech. So they must catch up with each other. Fast thinking. Why does a translator need this? As I said that during the process, sometimes he or she can come across with a difficulty. For example, it's an expression or a construction that he cannot translate into the target language, so he must think fast about how to do with that. Quick reaction, ability to get out of difficult situations, the ability to distribute attention, the ability to concentrate, the ability to disconnect from the external interference, mental and physical endurance, stress resistance. This is the main, of course, one of the main parts of the translation process, and because simultaneous translation is very tiresome process. So after maybe 5 or 10 minutes of non-stop translation, a translator may become very tired, mentally and physically. That's why 2 or 3 translators are needed at the same time in the cabin. And I want to conclude my speech that in the process of simultaneous translation, we saw that there are also advantages, disadvantages, some benefits, and of course some challenges. For example, let's summarize that there are a lot of challenges like this. For example, during the process, first the speaker may stray off the topic. A second, his word rate may become extended, and which will create a problem for the translator. Or sometimes their accent is not understandable, and their pace, their speech pace is not slow, and it's very fast. That's why a translator cannot catch up with the speaker. And this also affects the whole process in the conveying information, transferring the audience, the information, and etc. And the main thing, one of the main things in the process is about equipments, which cost much more. Because during the simultaneous translation, we need a cabin, an earphone, and of course a device which is intended to record your voice and transfer your voice to the audience. And those equipments are pricey, expensive. And that's why some people prefer consecutive translation, which doesn't need any equipment, because it is it's performed consecutively, subsequently. The speaker speaks, then you translate it. So as a result, I can say that simultaneous interpretation is one of the most difficult types of interpretation, one of the most expensive type of interpretation, but it also demands a lot of language skills and a lot of knowledge in encyclopedic language in both languages, and it will help you to translate your work easier. And that's the end of my lecture, and thank you very much.